Prepárese mi gente para gozar, la sonora carruseles le va a tocar. Prepárese mi gente para gozar, la sonora carruseles le va a tocar. Y arranquen pa, arranquen pa, y arranquen pa.
Welcome to the IWGB's first English radio podcast. I'm Anon Wasiri and I'm a volunteer press officer at the IWGB. In today's podcast, we'll be talking to various people who work for the union and talking about what the union does for its members. The Independent Workers' Union of Great Britain, or the IWGB, is a small independent trade union that represents low-paid migrant workers in London. The IWGB was formed in 2012 and is made up of 4 branches: the Cleaners and Facilities branch, the University of London branch, the Couriers and Logistics branch, and the Security Guards branch. I spoke to Henry Chango Lopez, who's the Vice President of the IWGB, to discuss the forming of the union and the various campaigns he has been involved in with the IWGB.
The IWGB was formed to represent those workers who have been unrepresented and basically have faced a lot of problems, have been underpaid, have been harassed, bullied, and haven't been able to join the established unions either because of the language or because they didn't know what was a union. So the difference that we make is that we are able to represent those lower paid workers because most of the people who are part of this union have been through struggles the same as those workers. So we know what they suffer, we know what they go through, so we are able to represent them better than the normal unions. One of the main problems we have faced is forming the structures of the union because we are such a small union that we have had to create policies within the union in order to keep the union moving, and also educating the workers, the people, about what is a union. I mean, that's been a bit difficult because some workers are happy to join because they have some problems, but then there are others who are scared of joining a union because they think they're going to get in trouble. So I think educating those workers have been a bit difficult for us. Our aim is to grow as a union and expand the work we have done, for example, at the University of London, where we have a branch of 400 workers. We have managed to win very good conditions in terms of sick pay, increasing of holidays, access to pension, and basically getting back the dignity and respect in the workplace that the workers now are able to enjoy. That's one of the key elements of the union and what we want to achieve in terms of expanding. Obviously, we want to expand in all the areas that we can in order to help those workers and also to help them to achieve what we have managed to achieve in our campaigns.
The IWGB grew out of the big unions and had its origins within Unison and Unite. I spoke to Union President Jason Moyer-Lee on how conflicts with Unison led to the rise of the IWGB and how they differ from the big unions.
We started in Unison at the University of London, and within Unison we're able to organize English classes and a successful London living wage campaign and enthuse hundreds of outsourced workers about being union members who previously were completely unorganized and not members of any union. However, Unison officials, besides the outsourced workers and a handful of supportive direct employees, really didn't do much. And after winning the London Living Wage campaign, we went on to the 3 Cosas Campaign for sick pay, holidays, and pensions. And at first, the branch officials, the kind of leadership, so-called leadership, was just absent more than anything. And then they moved in to an alliance with London region bureaucrats to actively fight against the campaign. And it even came out in The Guardian some months later that Unison was in secret talks with the university to undermine the campaign, and even said to University of London management that if they were to offer up just 1 day of annual leave when we were campaigning for public sector terms and conditions, that might be enough to stop the campaign. So with all this in the background, we still wanted to stay within Unison and make Unison work, so we put together a slate of candidates candidates that were pro Three Cosas campaign. We had branch elections where, sure, we won the elections, we got a massive turnout, and then Unison invalidated the elections on technicalities. So that was the kind of final straw. After that, we all left and started a branch of the IWGB. The IWGB caters mainly to low-paid migrant workers. Not all of our members are low-paid migrant workers, but the majority are. These are very different types of jobs to the kind of membership that Unison is used to catering to. These are people who don't necessarily speak English, people who work unsociable hours, have employment at 2 or 3 or 4 different places, not just one place. So we have a different organizing model that accommodates the reality of our members' work patterns and the types of problems they face. And I'd say the 2 areas where we differ, 3 areas where we differ the most with Unison is 1, workplace democracy. We actively encourage people to participate and vote and don't sabotage the democratic process like Unison deliberately does. The second one is campaigns. We're much more aggressive in our campaigns. We're willing to publicly target the clients using social media, flyers, protests, direct action, whatever it takes to win improvements in pay and terms and conditions for our members. And the third one is casework, where Unison was very hesitant even to do a formal grievance. We often do grievances. We use employment law in the interests of our members and take employers routinely to employment tribunals and settle or win. I think Unison has a particularly hard time when it comes to low-paid migrant workers. And the other big unions, Unite is a bit more uneven. They have some successes and some failures. But in general, the success of the IWGB and another union called United Voices of the World, which caters mainly to low-paid migrant workers as well, with these types of workers is virtually unparalleled.
The IWGB have worked on many high-profile campaigns, such as protesting against the Royal Opera House and John Lewis for not paying their workers a fair wage. One of the biggest campaigns the IWGB have been involved in was the Three Cosas campaign. I spoke to Vice President of the union, Henry Chango Lopez, about the campaign and how it's changed the work lives of many of its members.
Yeah, the main aims of the Three Cosas campaign was to improve terms and conditions for the outsourced workers at the University of London, but not just to improve, but also to get equality in terms and conditions with the direct employees of the University of London, because at the University of London there is like almost 400 workers who are outsourced, which are caterers, cleaners, porters, maintenance, securities. So our aim was to create that equality in terms of conditions. Our inspiration came from inequality that we saw within our working environment and the treatment we receive from these outsourcing companies. For example, it's not just about the conditions of employment like sick pay, holidays and pension, but it's also about the dignity and respect that we wanted to win as part of our campaign as well. And also in terms of the London living wage, for instance, we were exploited in all senses, like in payments, we were exploited in treatment. So what inspired us was all this suffering that we have had whilst working for these outsourcing companies, and our aims to get a decent working environment and terms and conditions. We obviously wanted to create equality within the outsourced workers and the direct employees, and also to end with the second-tier workforce that there is at the University of London. But although we managed to achieve those terms and conditions that we gained as part of our victory, we haven't won everything that we wanted to achieve. Big businesses are not supportive of good wages or good terms and conditions. Most of the time they try to cut the good conditions that workers have, and especially in terms of the government, we haven't had much support, especially with the government that we have now. They are making cuts everywhere, and they are even introducing the trade union bill, which is against the rights of the workers. I think obviously their aim is to make more profit for themselves than give the workers more wages. And with capitalists, they are trying to cut more money from any corner that they can cut. Yeah. And in most of the time, the lower paid workers are the ones who suffer the consequences of their cuts.
Giving legal advice and representing workers in cases is one of the main jobs within the union. I spoke to Nancy McCorrow, who is the legal coordinator at the IWGB, about how the role of the legal department within the IWGB has developed and how she feels about working within the union.
I've been working with the IWGB since October 2014. When I started with the IWGB, I was a caseworker, so obviously I was responsible for just my cases, but obviously now I'm in a management role. I worked as a caseworker for about 2 months, but given the level of my experience that I had, I was quite early into my volunteering. I was volunteering with the IWGB and I was promoted to a senior caseworker. The senior caseworker has similarities to the role that I have in the sense that I was supervising others. I was supervising for other caseworkers and managing their casework as well as my own. And my role is quite intricate in that it's very people orientated, 360 degrees. There's a lot of liaising with not only the volunteers, the members, the officials, external agencies. The content of the role is more political. As the legal department coordinator, it takes a political aspect in that you're more dealing with the politics of the union and how that feeds up and down into the cases and the legal challenges that you make. I did not come from a trade union background. I had no experience whatsoever of trade unions. Coming from a particular era, I remember from my youth the strikes that went on in the 70s. So I understood the concept and the politics of trade unionism and employment rights, but I didn't specifically work or have direct contact with a trade union. However, what I did bring to the table when coming to the trade union was my empathy and my experience of employment law and employment rights and the protection of such, whether it was a trade union or otherwise. My proudest moment, I would say, would be, well, there's been too many to say actually. There are various proud moments. The first time that I ever represented someone and stopped them from being dismissed. The first time I represented someone and they were dismissed and reinstated. The first time I represented someone and they received compensation. And when the caseworkers that I work with have their successes make me proud. The joy of, a single parent member who's received a check of a couple of thousand just before Christmas, on the phone, joyous. That's been a highlight moment. And of course, when I was, made legal department coordinator and, heading a fantastic legal team, that was, one of my proudest moments.
Now for the latest news within the IWGB. The IWGB is currently running in the ICE elections at the University of London. The Information and Consultation of Employees Forum provides a platform for open communication for employees of the University of London. Catherine Morrissey, who is the University of London branch secretary and member of the Union Executive Committee, talks about what the ICE does and what her and her other IWGB candidates want to contribute to the forum.
ICE stands for Information and Consultation of Employees, and that's the title of some legal regulations that allow for employees of any employer in the UK to be informed and consulted about issues that affect them in the workplace. And the reason that ICE, I'm going to call it ICE for short, is important is, as I say, because it's about information and consultation, it means that people can actually find out what their employer is planning and why, and be consulted on what they think about that. And so that is a way to make change, because if you are never told what's going on, you can't ever raise any questions or objections or make any suggestions about how that could be improved. So there's 5 positions for negotiating representatives, 2 in grades 1 to 6, which is Rebecca Dooley and Chris Joseph, and 3 in grades 7 to 10, which is myself, I'm Catherine Morrissey, Danny Millam and Damien Short. That's the IWGB slate. There is another group of candidates running. They're running together. They are from Unison and UCU, who, as I say, are already informed and consulted via a different mechanism called the JNCC. So it's really kind of pointless for them to be involved in the ICE forum, because that just kind of shuts down the communication between employees and the university to that group, and doesn't open it up the way that we want to open it up to more people.
So what are the main things that IWGB wants to improve within University of London?
I think the main thing, the first thing, is communication and information. The university is strangely kind of secretive about some things that it plans, and it comes up with strange ideas. For example, co-sector, which is an idea to privatise 3 departments of the university. At the moment it's 3, which don't really have anything in common and doesn't really make sense to anybody. It doesn't make sense to the staff that are being affected by this, and the information that has been given out to staff has been kind of patchy and confusing. So people want to understand these things better and how it affects them. So that's just one example of how better communication could lead to better understanding and better relations within the university. And that's kind of the second point, is to kind of improve the relationship between management and staff groups. I think it's been important to get support from Unison and UCU members because, as I say, the committees of Unison and UCU don't really seem to properly have understood what this is. And they seem quite afraid of it and quite negative about it. So I think it's important when ordinary members of Unison and UCU feel able to speak out and express their opinion and say that this is something positive that they think that they would actually want. Because I hope that will make Unison and UCU committees listen to that, because it comes from their own members, but also just to kind of reassure other members of those unions that this is not anything that they should be worried about, and that actually it can be a really positive and productive thing for everybody.
The IWGB went on to successfully win 2 of the negotiation positions in grades 1 to 6. The 1992 Trade Union and Labour Relations Act is currently stopping the IWGB from being able to fully carry out their duties with ease. I spoke to Union President Jason Moyer-Lee about the implications the Act has on the Union and taking the UK government to the European Court of Human Rights.
The IWGB is taking the UK government to the European Court of Human Rights because we believe that the UK law on trade union recognition is in violation of the European Convention on Human Rights. Article 11 of the European Convention establishes the right, freedom of association, right to join a trade union to protect one's interest, etc. And that has been interpreted from 2008 onwards as including the right to collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is often referred to as trade union recognition, or trade union recognition is the mechanism through which collective bargaining occurs in the United Kingdom. And the law on trade union recognition, which is contained in Schedule A1 to the Trade Union Labor Relations Consolidation Act 1992, and that was inserted by the Employment Relations Act 1999, which was put through by a Labour government, establishes a mechanism through which a union can compel an employer to recognize it. And that's usually done through majority membership, or if the union can show that a majority of workers in the workplace support recognition, then they can force the employer to recognize them. However, there's a loophole in the law that says that if an employer already recognizes a union, regardless of that union's membership, that a second union can't force the employer to recognize it. So you can have a bizarre situation where an employer recognizes a sweetheart union who has 1 member, and then a union they don't like, which represents 99% of the workforce, can do absolutely nothing to compel the employer to recognize it. And that's virtually the situation we have at the University of London with the outsourced company, NG, We represent over 60% of the workers there, and Unison represents maybe 5%. Yet because Unison is a rubber stamp union, and we are not, the employer wants to recognize Unison and uses that recognition to block us from getting recognition. Now, essentially, the UK law is preventing the outsourced workers at the University of London from enjoying their collective bargaining rights. And as such, we're arguing that that's a violation of the European Convention on Human Rights. And we're represented by John Hendy QC, who's one of the leading trade union barristers in the country. He believes we have a strong case. So these cases take time, but my guess is that the end result will be the European Court of Human Rights says this law is incompatible and the UK government will have to change the law. The Schedule A1 of the Trade Union and Labour Relations Consolidation Act of 1992, as I was saying earlier, essentially blocks the IWGB, or perhaps better put is to say it allows the employer to block the IWGB from obtaining trade union recognition in a situation where an employer already recognizes another union. Now, it doesn't mean that the IWGB can't represent workers on an individual basis. We can still do that in the current legislative framework. And it doesn't mean we can't campaign. We can still do that also. However, it does allow the employer to avoid bargaining, negotiating with us. And that becomes quite annoying because the employer will often sit down with Unison and get Unison to sign off on a deal that they've been pressured into signing because of our campaigning, and then they give Unison the credit. Now, most people don't believe this, but it does kind of give the employer a free pass and allows them to portray themselves as being progressive and caring about industrial relations because they recognize a trade union everyone's heard of. The other area where a lack of recognition hurts us is facilities time. Recognized unions have the right to have their union officials enjoy paid time off during working hours to carry out union duties and sometimes activities. So it's not unusual in maybe a university context to have a recognized union have someone who is paid full-time by the university but only does union stuff. Now, in such a small, resource-poor union like the IWGB, if we had one or two people who had even just a few days a week to do union stuff, but were paid by their employers, we could get 2 or 3 times as much work done. So that's another area where the Trade Union Labour Relations Consolidation Act 1992 is harming us. If we win the European Court of Human Rights case, there'll be a few concrete results. One will be we'll achieve union recognition at a few workplaces. That will mean the employers will be compelled to sit down at the negotiating table with us and negotiate in good faith. They won't be able to undermine us or our negotiating power by signing deals with rubber stamp unions like Unison. We will also get facilities time for some of our active members who are employees of the workplaces where we will get recognition. As I explained earlier, that will allow us to get a lot more work done on behalf of our members because we'll have people that have paid time during working hours to do union duties. And I think getting recognition at a number of workplaces will raise the status and credibility of the union with the public and with certain employers and to a certain extent with some workers. Most of the workers at the workplaces we've been at know what the union has achieved, but maybe new workers coming in for whatever reason who've been told that union recognition is key to achieving certain things might at first approach us with a bit of skepticism. Being a recognized union, having access to the employer, having that facilities time, being able to negotiate directly with the employer, always with the backup of industrial action or campaigning, I think will be far more productive than the current situation.
The couriers and logistics branch of IWGB have previously petitioned one of London's biggest courier companies, CitySprint, to raise their pay rates and have won. They are now petitioning E-Courier to pay their workers a living wage. Maggie Dewhurst talks to us about the process of the negotiations and how they are set to change the lives of E-Courier's workers.
The main aim of our union is to improve pay and conditions for all couriers and all logistics workers in the whole of London. So when it comes to E-Courier, it's about making sure that those guys are being paid correctly and sufficiently to live on. So the main aims with E-Courier was, like with the rest of them, it's about pay rise, and that pay rise being the London living wage plus reasonable costs, because as self-employed couriers, all the costs involved in our job are passed on to us. So they're not fronted by the organisation or the company that we work for. So everything they pay us, they charge the clients. And we're trying to force the clients to pay more and force the courier companies to pay more. With the E-Courier specifically, there were a few other kind of peripheral changes that our membership wanted to see. They were regarding specifically things about the bonus structure that they have in place, being paid fairly for the service that they're providing. So a lot of the work that push bike couriers do are actually booked as motorbike jobs. So we really wanted couriers to be paid for the motorbike work, whether as individual jobs or whether generally just to put the price up across the board, because for couriers it's very important to be paid correctly for the service they're providing, whether that's a rush job or a motorbike job or a standard push bike job. So we're seeking these other changes as well, and we had been mandated quite a lot of flexibility in how to get that. We just found quite a lot of resistance from the e-courier management, unfortunately. I started as a courier in 2011, and it became quite obvious quite quickly that the industry needed a union. It needs some sort of reform and regulation. Couriers across the board, whether they're earning a lot of money or nothing, could really do with better terms and conditions and better pay. It's rewarding in some ways, but there has been some sort of tipping point in the last few years, particularly with regard to the recession, the stagnation of wages, and the fact that the cost of living has kind of gone out of control in London. So all those kind of factors combined led to a few people getting really passionate about change and feeling that actually maybe it was time to set up some sort of union or join a union or start some sort of campaign to improve our own paying conditions and improve our interest. It kind of dovetailed with the City Sprint campaign. City Sprint announced a pay rise in December 2015 and implemented it in the first week of January 2016. It was obvious it was going to be quite significant. The membership were quite satisfied with it. And in our first branch meeting, we decided to write to our next target and the second biggest company in the chain, which is E-Courier. We gave them 3 weeks to get back to us and implement a pay rise effectively. And they got back to us after 1 week, suggesting that we negotiate. And we managed to find a time to negotiate, a couple of days before the 21 days. And those were our first negotiations with E-Courier. And they basically wanted us to believe that their payment structure, as it was sufficient. But on the other hand, they also admitted that they expected us to come to them. They said that they weren't surprised that we were targeting E-Courier and that they had taken part in the price war over the last 10 years. The industry is unregulated, so unlike most companies or sectors that have to pay their employees or their staff or their workers at least the national minimum wage by law, the courier industry is based on this kind of legal loophole, which is where you can kind of employ people or contract their services, is the phrase, at arm's length by making them sign a contract that says that they're an independent contractor. And being an independent contractor means that you don't have the rights of a worker. I mean, we're being told by managers at all companies that we don't even know the effects that we're having. I've said this to E-Courier before, and it's kind of a mantra in the union. There's so much that can be done to improve paying conditions for couriers. Pay people properly, recognise the costs that are incurred by the job. We're not saying that we should get some sort of allowance at the moment, at least, about those things, or a pension or physiotherapy or something like that. If you pay people properly, they will work hard. Have transparency in your company. Don't take the piss. I mean, couriers are really sick and tired of being treated with contempt, and whether they've been there for a couple of months or a couple of years or a couple of decades. There should be more respect and better treatment for couriers in the industry.
The couriers branch of the IWGB is taking 4 of the UK's biggest courier companies to tribunal. If successful, the ruling could bring about the biggest change to the courier industry ever. I spoke to accreditation officer of the couriers branch, Maggie Dewhurst, about how the case will affect the way the courier industry is run.
The Courier Tribunal case is about challenging the employment status of independent contractors in the courier industry. And we're challenging the employment status of the independent contractor. So the way a tribunal works is that you would make a claim for something that only an employee or a worker would have the right to. So, for example, paid annual leave. And the cases, before they get to a kind of court where it's decided whether they should pay you for unpaid holiday, there's a employment status hearing, and they kind of use that to determine your employment status. So the courier companies will say, hey, that person is a independent contractor, they're not entitled to anything, so this is a load of rubbish. And we'll turn around and say, well, actually, our independent contractor status is bogus, and the nature of our job is that we should be actually classed as a worker or as an employee. I think it would be great if we win this. It would give the union a lot of strength. It will revolutionise the industry. Overnight, everyone will get holidays and the right to the national minimum wage, and that will transform the industry and it will bring about reform and regulation. So it will be fantastic for couriers. Even though the courier companies might not like it so much, it will ultimately be much better for the whole industry. We would have the protection for the unlawful deduction of wages, which is a big one in our industry because money is docked all the time. There'll be a floor for pay, which hasn't been around before. So courier companies will have to put up their prices to the customers, and the customers will have to pay more. And I'm sure they will fight it. You know, they already band around a lot of myths and they enjoy scaremongering a lot. And all of this stuff that they're banding around and, oh, if we lose this client, we'll go bust and all that stuff is kind of clearly rubbish because they have put the rates up and the clients can afford to pay more, and the pay freeze of 15 years is beginning to change, and, you know, the recession is over. There is money around. Couriers, at the end of the day, shouldn't be the ones who are suffering financially, mentally, emotionally, physically, because some company they work for and their clients can't be bothered to afford them normal employment rights. At the end of the day, regulation is going to be good for the courier companies and the couriers. There should be a law or something somewhere that says, you know what, in London, you can't pay a push-bike courier less than £3 to deliver something. There should be something somewhere that puts just a tiny bit of regulation on this thing. I'm not after a kind of Soviet-style destruction of the market. I understand that these companies, and I pretty much respect that they are competing on price and on technology and quality of service, and I think that's great. And some companies deliver a fantastic service and some deliver a fantastic price. Whatever. I'm not interested in that. I just want the exploitation to end, and I think, you know, a bit of regulation may even be good for the market. It may help move things around a little bit and shake things up, and this free market situation isn't ideal.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you want more information about the IWGB, please go to our website, which is www.iwgb.org.uk, or email us at office@iwgb.org.uk and we'll get back to you. Please leave a comment telling us what you'd like to hear in the next show, and we'll try to include as many topics as we can. Thank you and bye.